Imagine you are just, scrolling through your news feed right now. You see headline after headline about artificial intelligence automating cognitive work, factories deploying new robotics, all that stuff.
Oh, yeah, it is everywhere.
Right. And there is this widespread anxiety about whether technology is actually going to liberate us from toil or just, well, completely devalue our labor entirely. It feels really palpable.
Absolutely.
Yet,
And it feels entirely unprecedented, like it is a strictly 21st century problem.
exactly. But what if I told you that the underlying mechanics of that exact anxiety, I mean, the mathematical formulas dictating how and why a machine replaces a human, were meticulously mapped out in a messy, ink-stained notebook back in 1862?
The parallels are striking, honestly, when you look at the raw documentation from that era. We're looking at a period where the steam engine and early industrial chemistry were doing to physical labor what modern computing is doing to cognitive labor today.
Yeah, and the notebooks capturing the mechanics of that shift are just profoundly revealing. So today, we are taking you down into the muddy excavation pit of one of the most fiercely argued economic theories of all time. We are looking at the raw, unfiltered workbench of Karl Marx.
Which is a wild place to be.
It really is. We are diving into volume 34 of the Marx and Engels collected works, which basically covers his writings from 1861 to 1864.
Right. And specifically, we are exploring notebooks 20 through 23 of his massive economic manuscript.
Yeah, which spans pages 1251 to 1472 of his notes. Plus, we have something incredibly rare to look at in this deep dive. We're looking at the surviving fragments of his third rough draft of what would eventually become the book Capital, including the highly debated Chapter 6.
Yeah, volume 34 really represents a transitional space. I mean, it contains the conclusion of his massive economic manuscript of 1861 to 1863, which is widely considered his second rough draft of Capital.
Right.
But it also bleeds into those 1863 to 1864 fragments, which are, the only extant remnants we have of his third rough draft.
Now, before we jump into the mud here, just a quick but very important reminder for you listening. This deep dive is a strictly impartial exploration of the original source material.
Exactly. We are just looking at the texts.
Right. We are here to unpack the historical and economic theories contained in these specific drafts. We are definitely not here to endorse or take sides on any politically charged viewpoints.
Our goal is simply to show you what is actually in these notebooks. How these world-changing ideas were being formed on the page.
Yep. Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even start with something this dense?
Well, to start, we really need to understand the physical and intellectual nature of what we are analyzing. When you read a polished, published book, the author has usually smoothed over all the underlying logic to make the narrative flow.
Sure, they hide the mess.
Right. The mathematical and philosophical scaffolding is hidden behind the drywall, so to speak.
I have to push back on the value of that, though. Like, is there a danger in reading too much into a rough draft rather than the final published work? I mean, authors cut things for a reason.
That is a fair point.
Sometimes an idea is just a dead end or a blooper. So what does a fragment like Chapter 6 show us that the final, polished version of Capital might actually obscure?
What's fascinating here is that a rough draft doesn't just show you discarded ideas. It shows you the connective tissue that sometimes gets severed for the sake of brevity in the editing process.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, in Chapter 6, which focuses on the results of the direct production process, Marx is actively figuring out how to categorize the commodity itself.
He's working it out on the page.
Exactly. He is wrestling with the definitions in real time, working out how capitalist relations actually reproduce themselves. By looking at the draft, you see the mathematical proofs before the final answer is published. You see the evolution of the whole framework.
Okay, so it is less like looking at a blooper reel and more like looking at the director's storyboards before the special effects are added to the movie.
That is a great way to put it.
You see the bare mechanics of the plot, which kind of brings up the primary economic problem Marx was trying to solve in these specific notebooks. I mean, how does capital actually grow? What are the core mechanics of the whole machine?
Right. So in this part of the manuscript, Marx concludes his analysis of the production process of capital, and his heavy concentration is on the concept of relative surplus value and its connection to absolute surplus value.
Okay, those are some heavy terms.
Yeah, he dedicates immense page space to analyzing the ratio of wages to surplus value.
Let's ground this for the listener, because that sounds like a textbook. Put me in a textile factory in, say, 1862. I need to understand the actual difference between my boss extracting absolute versus relative surplus value from my daily labor.
Sure. It basically comes down to the division of your working day. So let's say you work a 10-hour day.
Okay, 10 hours.
In the first 5 hours, you produce enough value in textiles to cover your own wages.
Right, the money I need for food, shelter, survival.
Exactly. The remaining 5 hours, that is surplus value. You are still working, you are still producing, but the value of those goods goes entirely to the factory owner.
So I am essentially working for free for the second half of the day.
In his framework, yes. Now, if the owner wants to increase that surplus profit, the most straightforward method is simply extending your shift.
Make me work longer.
Right. Make it 12 hours or 14 hours. That is extracting absolute surplus value and absolute extension of the working day.
But if the biological limit is capped, I mean, eventually I have to sleep or I literally drop dead on the loom, the owner hits a wall, right?
Yep. Biology is the hard limit there.
Plus, historically, workers started fighting back and demanding legal limits on the working day. So if the absolute time is legally or biologically capped at 10 hours, the only way the boss can get more surplus is to make me produce my own daily wage value faster.
Exactly. They need to shrink that 5-hour window down to, say, 3 hours.
That is the exact mechanism of relative surplus value, right?
You got it. If we connect this to the bigger picture, capital has to pivot from extending the day to changing the ratio of time within the day. The primary way to achieve that is by making the labor process more efficient.
How do they do that?
Well, often by cheapening the goods you need to survive. If the cost of your food and shelter drops, the value of your labor capacity drops. It basically costs less to keep you alive.
Oh, wow. So you require less wage value.
Right, meaning you produce your daily keep in a fraction of the time, leaving way more hours of the day as pure surplus for the owner.
But wait, for this boss to extract any surplus value in the first place, how did the worker end up in that factory with absolutely nothing to sell but their time?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because if we rewind 100 years, that worker might have been a peasant farmer working their own plot of land, making their own clothes. They weren't seeking out a factory boss just to survive.
You are identifying the historical prerequisite for this entire system. Marx spends significant time analyzing this in these drafts, under the concept of the primitive accumulation of capital.
Primitive accumulation, what does that actually mean?
It is the historical process that forcibly divorced the worker from the means of production.
Because it wasn't just a natural evolution where, like, some people were frugal and saved up to build factories, while others were just lazy and had to ask for jobs.
No, not at all. Marx's notes argue very forcefully against that peaceful origin story. He points to massive historical expropriations.
Like what?
Like the enclosure of common lands in England. Peasants were pushed off the land and forced into the cities. But the brilliance of Marx's analysis here is showing how this functioned mechanically.
Right.
Driving peasants off the land didn't just render them homeless. It fundamentally transformed them from self-sustaining individuals into a captive market.
Oh, I see. Because if I can't grow my own food or weave my own shirts on my own loom anymore, I now have to go out and buy them.
Exactly. And you have to buy them from the very capitalists who now own the land and the large-scale looms.
That is a brutal cycle.
It is. Primitive accumulation created a massive, desperate labor force and a massive consumer base simultaneously. Once that historical foundation was laid, the engine of extracting absolute and relative surplus value could just take over and run on its own.
That perfectly covers the micro level, me in the factory dealing with my boss. But the outline for this deep dive notes that in these 1861 to 1863 manuscripts, Marx also starts dealing with problems he would later reserve for Book 2 of Capital.
Yes, he really starts zooming out here.
Specifically, he looks at the reproduction and circulation of the total social capital. So what happens when we zoom out from one factory to the whole country?
Well, when you zoom out, the complexity multiplies exponentially. Marx realized he couldn't just explain how one factory owner exploits one worker. He had to explain how all the different capitalists interact with each other.
Like a giant web.
Precisely. The factory owner making the looms has to sell them to the factory owner making the textiles. And they sell the shirts to the coal miners who mine the coal to power the loom factory.
It is all interconnected.
Right, this macro network is the total social capital. In these notebooks, Marx is trying to mathematically model how value circulates through this entire web without the system just collapsing on itself. That became the heavy, highly technical focus of his later work.
And once you are locked into that macro system, with thousands of capitalists competing with each other, the drive for relative surplus value, that drive for efficiency we just talked about, becomes a matter of life or death for a business.
Absolutely. Adapt or die.
And the most logical way for a factory owner to make labor more efficient and beat the competition is to bring in new technology. Here's where it gets really interesting for us today.
Oh, this is the best part.
The manuscript has a highly specific section titled Machinery, Utilization of the Forces of Nature and of Science.
Yeah, he specifically lists steam, electricity, and mechanical and chemical agencies. The section details the replacement of labor by machinery.
When you read this section, you can draw a direct line to today. I mean, Marx is sitting there in the 1860s analyzing steam and chemical agencies replacing 19th century manual labor, and today we are looking at generative artificial intelligence and advanced robotics replacing 21st century cognitive labor.
The underlying logic he maps out is identical. Marx's analysis goes far beyond just noticing that new gadgets are being invented.
Right.
He is analyzing how the forces of nature and science are literally harnessed by capital to alter that crucial ratio of wages to surplus value. A machine is not introduced into this system to lighten the toil of the human being.
Right. It's not technology for the sake of making human life better. It's technology deployed as a weapon of efficiency. Like, if an AI can write 50 marketing emails in a minute, the company doesn't send their human copywriter home at noon with full pay because the day's work is done.
Of course not. The company either fires the copywriter entirely or expects the copywriter to produce 1,000 emails a day for the same or even less pay.
Because the wage ratio has shifted.
Exactly. The replacement of labor by machinery that Marx details is about how science and nature themselves are incorporated into capital. In the craftsman era, a human wielded a tool.
And now?
In the industrial capitalist era, the machine wields the human. The worker becomes a mere appendage to the machine, just feeding it or overseeing it, which drastically devalues the specific skill of the human laborer.
That completely demystifies the anxiety we feel today. The technology is amazing, but we are anxious because we instinctively know the machinery will be used to alter the ratio of our surplus value, not to give us more free time.
We feel it in our bones, even if we don't know the 19th century math behind it.
It's wild to see him map this out over a century and a half ago. But we also have to remember he didn't develop these theories in a vacuum, right? The closing part of this 1861 to 1863 manuscript is essentially a massive structured argument with other intellectuals.
Yeah, a significant portion of this volume consists of excerpts from the works of earlier and contemporary political economists.
And he didn't just copy them politely.
No, they are accompanied by Marx's own intense, often scathing commentaries. He is systematically testing his own framework against every existing explanation of how wealth is generated.
He is fighting it out on the page. And one of his biggest targets in this volume is the Malthusian theory of population, named after Thomas Malthus. Let me trace the logic here, because this is fascinating.
Go for it.
Did Marx spend all this time copying out Malthus's work just to write angry notes in the margins out of intellectual vanity? Or was dismantling Malthus's theory of overpopulation structurally necessary for Marx's own theory of surplus value to hold up?
This raises an important question about how economic theories actually compete to explain the reality of human suffering. Malthus argued that poverty is a natural mathematical law of biology.
Just a fact of nature.
Right. He claimed that human populations naturally grow geometrically, while the food supply only grows arithmetically.
Sure.
Therefore, you will always have a surplus population of poor, starving people.
So under Malthusian theory, if there is widespread unemployment and starvation in London, you don't blame the factory owners or the economic system, you blame biology. It's just nature balancing the books.
Exactly. And you can see why Malthusian theory was incredibly convenient for the ruling classes. It completely absolved them of any responsibility for the misery of the working class.
Wow, yeah. It just washes their hands of it.
Poverty was framed as a natural phenomenon caused by the poor just having too many children.
So Marx has to destroy that argument. Because if Malthus is right, then Marx's entire theory about surplus value and exploitation is entirely secondary to basic biology.
Precisely. Marx subjects Malthus to a brutal critical analysis. He had to prove that poverty, unemployment, and the replacement of labor were not natural inevitabilities.
They were man-made.
Yes. He had to show they were structural, necessary features of capital. Capitalism, through its constant drive for relative surplus value and technological innovation, intentionally creates what Marx called a relative surplus population.
Or industrial reserve army, right?
Yeah, exactly. An industrial reserve army.
Because if the steam loom replaces 50 workers, those 50 workers are now unemployed. They join the reserve army. And having a pool of desperate, unemployed workers standing outside the factory gates is highly beneficial to the owner.
Why? Because it keeps the wages of the employed workers inside the factory as low as possible. If you complain, there are 50 people outside willing to take your job for less money.
Right. So Marx dismantled Malthus to show the listener that the system produces its own overpopulation as a mechanism of wage control, not as some sort of biological accident.
That is exactly the point. And he doesn't just go after Malthus either.
Who else is in the crosshairs?
The index references in this volume show he also engages in deep combat with David Ricardo.
Another heavy hitter.
Yeah, particularly touching on the Ricardian law of differential rent. To understand why Marx targets this, we need to quickly look at what Ricardo was actually saying.
Okay, lay it on me.
David Ricardo is another giant of classical economics. His law of differential rent basically explained how landlords make their money based on the unequal fertility of land.
Okay, fertility of land.
Imagine two farms. Farm A is on incredibly fertile soil near a river. Farm B is on rocky, dry soil up a hill. Farm A produces much more wheat for the exact same amount of labor.
Makes sense.
Ricardo argued that the landlord of Farm A can charge a much higher rent simply because of that natural advantage.
Okay, but why does Marx need to argue with that in these drafts? I mean, it seems pretty straightforward that good dirt grows more wheat. What is there to debate?
It is straightforward, but Marx is digging into the root source of value itself. Ricardo is looking at nature, the fertility of the soil, as a primary driver of this differential value.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Marx, while acknowledging natural advantages, wants to relentlessly center his labor theory of value. He needs to parse out exactly how the natural fertility of the earth intersects with human labor time.
Because if value comes from dirt, Marx's whole focus on labor is undermined.
Right. He engages with Ricardo to clear the intellectual brush, ensuring that his own definition of value remains firmly anchored in the social relations of human labor, not just the biological facts of dirt or population.
So what does this all mean? Let's pull everything together for you listening, because we covered a lot of ground today.
Oh, you really did.
We started in this raw 23 notebook workbench of the 1861 to 1863 manuscripts. We walked through the gritty mechanics of absolute and relative surplus value, how the system actually extracts time and labor from the worker.
And we looked at how capital uses machinery, harnessing the forces of science and nature to shrink the worker's required time and maximize that surplus.
Right. We zoomed out to the macro level of total social capital. And we saw Marx tearing down Malthus and Ricardo to prove that poverty and value are features of a human-made system, not inevitable laws of nature.
It really is a staggering amount of intellectual labor captured in a single volume of drafts.
It is mind-blowing, but I want to leave you with one final idea to ponder, drawn directly from the rare surviving third draft we mentioned at the beginning, Chapter 6, Results of the Direct Production Process.
Oh, this might be the most crucial philosophical insight of the entire volume.
Yeah.
It requires a real shift in how you view the economy entirely.
In Chapter 6, Marx notes that the ultimate result of capitalist production isn't just commodities. Like, when a factory runs for a year, its ultimate product isn't just a million shirts.
Right.
Its ultimate product isn't even just the profit generated from those shirts. The ultimate result of the process is the continuous reproduction of capitalist relations themselves.
The system is essentially a perpetual motion machine designed to maintain its own structure.
Exactly.
Every cycle of production consumes the worker's labor power and leaves them needing to work again the next day just to survive. Simultaneously, it concentrates more surplus value into the hands of the owner, expanding their capital.
It doesn't just create goods. It literally recreates the capitalist with their capital on one side and the wage laborer with nothing but their labor power on the other.
It manufactures the very social classes required to keep the system running.
So I want to challenge you, the listener, to look around your own workplace or industry tomorrow. When you see a new piece of software rolled out, a new AI tool mandated by corporate, or even a new management structure put in place, look past the immediate product.
Look at what it is actually doing.
Right. Ask yourself, is the technology you use today just producing an email or a spreadsheet or a widget, or is it fundamentally reproducing the power relationship between you and your employer?
When you start looking at the mathematical scaffolding instead of just the finished glass and steel, the entire building looks completely different.
We're back in the muddy excavation pit, and suddenly you can see exactly how the whole thing is held together. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll catch you on the next one.